Stephen, very important numbers, an increase in irregular expenditure, which I'm sure will be a concern to many South African citizens. But on the positive side, at least, there is an improvement in the number of clean audits. And joining me now is the Auditor General to dig into this a little bit deeper. AG, thank you for your time. You audited over 600 departments. And in this report, you report on 400 of them. But only 100 of those departments genuinely received a clean audit, which is 1 in 6 roughly. Should we see this as a good thing, though?
Good afternoon, Kopano. So 115 clean audits is worth celebrating. I think it's worth acknowledging because it means we are making the right moves. Some authorities are starting to hear our messages. They are heeding our call and they are putting in place the key disciplines that set them up for proper delivery, ongoing and sustained delivery. So I think it's important to acknowledge that we have moved in the right direction. The other point that we should never lose sight of is that a number of auditees are now able to report credibly on how they've managed finances. It doesn't mean they've delivered services. It doesn't mean that they don't have problems. But at least if you've got over 70% of national and provincial government departments and entities reporting faithfully on how they've spent the funds that are appropriated to them, that's an important step in the journey towards wholesale good governance and accountability. So it is worth acknowledging, and it is worth mentioning also that there were another 31, over and above the 150, there were another 31 that were just under the line. They could have gotten over had they done just a few basic things correctly. So next year, if things continue on this basis, we should be able to have even more clean audits, which is important. It's an important base for setting up the accountability mechanisms that allow us to deliver services and win back the confidence of citizens.
So there has been some progress, as you mentioned in your report, slow progress. But on the negative side, unfortunately, you flagged some very important institutions, mainly the SOEs and a few of the key service delivery departments. I want to start with SOEs. There are several of them that have either not submitted their financial results or they are at risk of not being going concerns going forward. How do you take remedial action against such businesses?
You know, the first thing we've got to do is build the culture of compliance and performance in these institutions, because at the end of the day, these are institutions that are so critical for our economy, and we've got to make sure that they are delivering on their mandate as has been said. And the things we're calling for are not impossible. Make sure that you have credible financial statements right. This year, there were only 2 state-owned entities out of the 15 that we audited, only 2 that could give us quality financial statements when we started to audit. The rest we had to give opportunity to fix, and there were quite a few that ultimately were unable to fix their financial statements and ended up with qualified reports. The other problem around SOEs is that far too many of them don't submit financial statements. Yes, there may be different reasons for that, whether it's business rescue or provincial liquidation, but it's an accountability gap, and we do have to deal with it.
I want to stay on this point a little bit more. In recent times, both Eskom and Transnet have raised concerns with how they report to you as the AG and PFMA and how their businesses genuinely function, saying that sometimes procurement is the biggest stumbling block when it comes to them executing on their mandates. Have you had engagements with both of those institutions to talk about this going forward?
Yes, Kopano, I'm aware that there are concerns about how PFMA allows agility and responsiveness in terms of how those enterprises should run. I believe that at the end of the day, whatever solution is arrived at after proper, frank and directed, focused engagement, whatever solution we get to, has got to be one that still allows us to ensure that these public institutions demonstrate the appropriate levels of good governance. They are managing public funds in a way that's prudent and consistent with the provisions of Section 195 of our Constitution, and that they are accountable in the way that the Constitution would have public administration run.
You flagged some concerns around housing and social development specifically. When we look back on this year of COVID-19 and the ongoing lockdowns and how it's impacted society, that social development and housing are not managing their finances as well as they should be is really quite concerning. What other remedial actions can you take other than flagging that they're not taking this responsibility seriously?
So, Kopano, you know that the powers that are attached to the Office of the AG were enhanced about 2 years ago, and we've been implementing these in a systematic way, in a phased approach, and we've been taking on more and more of the audits to implement what's called the material irregularity process, which essentially allows the audit office to go beyond just flagging, but to rather follow up on whether or not our recommendations have been implemented, and to ensure that those recommendations are implemented and that we enforce accountability. Those powers need to be understood in the context of saying that we do not take over the roles and responsibilities of accounting officers. They still have to do what they're supposed to do. The executive authorities, the ministers or MECs that oversee them, they still have to supervise them and monitor them appropriately. The legislatures, the parliamentarians, they still have to do their work in a way that's effective. Ours is to follow up and get people to do what they're supposed to do. When they don't, we can run a process towards even issuing what is called a certificate of debt. We are not there yet. Since we've been implementing these powers over the last 2.5 years, now we are at the point where we've issued remedial action, binding remedial action on 3 auditees, 4 binding remedial actions on 3 auditees in total, which if they still ignore us, or if they still don't do what's adequate and appropriate in terms of enforcing consequence management, then we will have no option but to issue a certificate of debt. Our view is that a certificate of debt should not be something that we celebrate. It should be an indication that there are significant failures on the part of the accounting authority, on the part of the executive authority, and even on the part of the legislature that's supposed to supervise them and oversee them. That you have to have the Office of the AG issuing a certificate of debt would be an acknowledgement of severe failure on the part of many other players in the accountability ecosystem.
Tsakani Maluleke, thank you for your time. That's all we have time for today. There you have the Auditor General just taking us through some of the highlights of the very extensive report they've done for this year, Stephen. There are very serious concerns around state-owned entities especially, as well as some of the key service delivery departments, health, education and social development, which are all supposed to be enablers for our people to come out of the difficult times they've had. But when it comes to their finances, they're not managing them as well as they should be, Stephen.
Kopano Gumbi, our business reporter, thank you very much indeed for that update with the Auditor General talking there about the results of that audit.